Welcome back, Ultimate Weapons, it's the Night Sky Prince again. It's no secret that Final Fantasy VII is a game that was massively popular. So popular, in fact, that it was the first Final Fantasy game to get several spin-offs, and its own expanded media project known as the Compilation of Final Fantasy VII. During a time where fans were extremely hungry for a remake, Square Enix was unable to even attempt one at the time. Knowing this, however, they decided to give us a series of games, a movie, and even an anime that would attempt to tide us over. And while the overall reception of the compilation ranges from decent to average, it was Square Enix's way of offering us more Final Fantasy VII when they couldn't give us the remake that we actually wanted. Now with Final Fantasy VII Remake becoming a reality, its director, Tetsuya Nomura, seems to have wiped the slate completely clean by making the compilation non-canon. When asked if he would have any interest in remastering the compilation, Nomura said, quote, "Concerning Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is a title loaded with a lot of mystery for now, it will be different from the original Final Fantasy VII. If we make a compilation, these games will hardly have an overall coherence. It will be difficult because there is no more continuity between the compilation and the remake for the moment. The most intriguing part of that statement in particular is, if we make a compilation of these games, it will hardly have an overall coherence." This seems to suggest that the direction that Final Fantasy VII Remake is going in and the one that the compilation went in are two very different directions. And while it seems that Square Enix is open to take things from the compilation stylistically, such as Cloud's hair from Advent Children and the Buster Swords design, which is something that I seldomly see get commented on, I'm genuinely surprised that I haven't seen anyone point this out. But Cloud's Buster Sword in the remake is not the one featured in Crisis Core. It's also not the one featured in the original game either. The Buster Sword in the remake is a literal fusion of Cloud's original Buster Sword. It goes back to the original Buster Sword's silver hilt design. However, it maintains the detailed etching of the blade found in Crisis Core. And honestly, this is my favorite version of the Buster Sword so far. It's a design that maintains the original feel of the Buster Sword, but it does pull in modern elements, making it sort of the ultimate Buster Sword in a way. I think the design of the Buster Sword most powerfully represents the Final Fantasy VII Remake, a return to the past with the details of the present and future. And this very concept makes me have to ask, what should Nomura and his team keep from the compilation, and what should they just delete altogether? Since we're on the topic of the Buster Sword, the Buster Sword's retcon lore was a bit odd to me to say the least. In Crisis Core, the Buster Sword is treated more like a ceremonial sword, instead of a sword meant for combat in a combat-driven world. Because of this, both the Buster Sword's original owner, Angeal, and its second owner, Zack Fair, are said to sparingly use the Buster Sword, which is actually not true. In fact, it's kind of an outright lie. While Angeal is rarely shown actually using it, by the time way late game rolls around, Cloud decides to throw out some lines about how he's never seen Zack actually use the Buster Sword to force a connection with him and Angeal. But by that point, you had literally been using the Buster Sword for almost the entire second half of the game. I also don't think this type of backstory was really needed for the Buster Sword, and considering how Cloud uses many swords throughout the course of Final Fantasy VII, and probably even more so in Final Fantasy VII Remake, there's just not much point in Final Fantasy VII Remake keeping this plot point. That said, Zack's character overall has been a huge success for Square Enix, and was easily the most successful thing about Crisis Core itself. The original Final Fantasy VII didn't have much Zack presence at all, and this is the perfect opportunity for Square to fix that by making Zack flashbacks playable. In fact, considering you could even open Volume 2 or 3 of the remake by allowing the opening tutorial hours to be a playable Zack sequence that quickly recaps the important canon events of Final Fantasy VII. If something like playing as Roxas in Kingdom Hearts 2 is what you're imagining, then we're on the exact same page. Genesis was a new villain inserted in for Crisis Core, and he was met to some pretty mixed receptions. First of all, the idea of inserting Gact, a literal Japanese pop star, into Final Fantasy VII was just not a good idea. In hindsight, it's actually funny to think how people reacted to Ariana Grande becoming a unit in Brave Exvius. Yet somehow, this was able to fly over the radar. After all, Gact becoming a literal canon character in FF7 is literally no different than, say, Michael Jackson becoming a literal canon character in Sonic the Hedgehog. It's really outlandish when you think about it. I mean, people got so offended by the product placement of Cup Noodle in Final Fantasy 15. Imagine placing an entire celebrity's identity inside of a video game. You can graze over Cup Noodle a lot more easily than you can Genesis. It's also heavily speculated by fans till this day that the point of inserting Genesis in the Crisis Core and into Dirge of Cerberus was to always leave Final Fantasy open for the possibility of a Final Fantasy VII-2, which didn't end up happening. Aside from that, that, Genesis wasn't even ultimately a compelling character, usually citing lines of poetry and having some of the lamest dialogue of any villain in the whole series. He's just not overall important to Final Fantasy VII. He doesn't really provide any new explanations for anything. He's just not necessary. So for me, Genesis is something that should not return for Final Fantasy VII Remake. Sephiroth's single angel wing never actually appears in his human form during the course of Final Fantasy VII. This was something shown off in Kingdom Hearts, Crisis Core, and even Advent Children, yet this wing never makes an actual appearance in the original game. However, this seems to basically be confirmed already, judging by the last key artwork that Square Enix released, showing Sephiroth spouting his one angel wing while in his human form. It simply makes sense to include it in this remake. Also, if used correctly, it can make for a really impactful reveal. Advent Children tends to be a very nostalgic movie for people, myself included, and of course Tetsuya Nomura directed both the movie and is currently directing the remake. It only makes sense for him to incorporate elements from it. However, my only stipulation is that it's not included until the final volume of Final Fantasy VII Remake, as a way to allude to Advent Children's story playing out in the coming years. That said, having Advent Children Cloud's costume as an unlockable in the final game of the presumable remake trilogy would be absolutely incredible. The inclusion of the fusion sword seen in Advent Children would also make an incredible addition, particularly if it has some of the abilities that were seen in the movie, like the sword having the ability to break down into different parts, or even giving us the upgraded Omni Slash when you use it. To get to Final Fantasy VII Remake, we went through a lot of side stories, spin-offs, cameos, teases, and many other hoops. When held up to the original game, the compilation was never anything mind-blowing, but through the years, things like Advent Children and Crisis Core at least give us gateways to go back into one of my favorite video game worlds of all time. So Ultima Weapons, I want to know, what things from the compilation of Final Fantasy VII do you want to see get used, and what things do you want to see completely be kept away from the remake? Subscribe, click the bell icon, and let me know in the comments below. And if you really love Final Fantasy VII, I mean really love Final Fantasy VII, be sure to check out our Facebook group, Ultima, Square Enix plus JRPGs, where one wing is all you need for functional flight. Link in the description below.